Welcome to Bastionland Broadcasting, where we are back in the usual Tuesday night slot, and for the first time in history, we are ahead of schedule. Because today we are carrying on what we did last week, but we're taking a slightly different angle. So last week I was looking at some GM advice posts on Reddit, or rather some posts with people asking for GM advice for particular problems. And today we are looking at the other side of the coin. So I really enjoyed doing that last week. It was a little bit of a, I mean, I'll be honest, a lot of the things that I do on this stream get thought of on the day, and sometimes they are not well, I don't want to say filler, but sometimes I feel like I have to get creative with what I'm doing, and I don't necessarily mean that in a way that's praising myself for being creative, but I have to get creative because there isn't a natural idea there, so I have to really grasp to think of something to do on the stream. And this idea kind of came out of that attitude, but I actually ended up really enjoying it, and I think there was a lot of people in the chat that seemed to be into it, so I thought, why not continue this theme? And today we are slightly different, because we are not on. Let me just adjust this light. This is quite bright. We need to. We are going to get into this, but I am going to give you the much desired weather update, because, as you can tell by the fact that I am in brighter spirits than I was last week, order has been restored, and I'm looking outside to a very grey, cloudy Manchester sky, and I can wear normal clothes, and I'm not feeling like I'm in a sauna. So we are back to normal weather, which is all I want in the world, is to be able to function without feeling like the world is fighting me. So we are going to be looking at some player problems, or rather player questions, that people have posted on PC Academy on Reddit. So PC Academy, I just sort of found the most popular player-based subreddit, and it is very much D&D focused, as you can tell from the banner here. But we're going to be, they are going to be kind of D&D based questions, but we are going to be thinking about how we can apply that in a more general sense, perhaps, because I'm not going to be running 5th edition anytime soon. I think it's fair to say. So I'm going to hydrate, and then we are going to solve some problems. Hi, I'm currently playing in a homebrew D&D 5th edition campaign where it seems to me that either our DM isn't doing enough prep work before our sessions, or isn't that experienced in DMing. I'm asking for advice from experienced players and DMs on how to improve our situation. Our homebrew campaign is set in a mostly unexplored island, and the party was straight away introduced to a big bad evil guy, Blue Dragon, challenge rating 16. After several low-level sessions of fighting run-of-the-mill forest beasts, that run-of-the-mill forest beasts is like the most insulting phrase I've heard for like a bear. Our level 7 good alignment party encountered a challenge rating 14 undead wizard / lich. Got our butts kicked, and we were forced to serve as underlings to this evil wizard. As the evil wizard's minions, our job was to hunt down a blue dragon, and what followed was 5 sessions of encountering major villains that we had no hope of defeating yet, and being forced to choose between serve me or die. We had 5 character deaths so far, caused by choosing the latter. The party has decided to escape this hellish island, practically decided to leave the campaign scene, because there seems to be no way to defeat these high-level big bad evil guys that keep finding us, no matter where the party runs to. As far as I know, our DM created a sandbox island with a BBEG that our party was dropped into. I have a gut feeling that our sessions are only being planned with only the very next session in mind. Imagine that. We've had a high turnover, with 5 players leaving and 5 new players being recruited during the 4.5 months the campaign has lasted. Out of the 5 character deaths, 3 have been my own, so I'm having trouble creating any permanent character progression. Right, on a personal note, as a player, I find myself often having to keep track of things such as conditions that are currently affecting the party, saving throws, advantages, etc. etc., etc. I don't think it should be in my place as a player, reminding the table of NPC creatures' opportunity attacks. Oh, this is like painful. This is painful to read. The idea of having to track NPC creatures' opportunity attacks. It's not a phrase I ever want to say. The current way things are getting done is making me feel like a rules lawyer. I'm also worried that if I stop juggling the balls, the GM won't be able to catch them in time. The whole thing just crashes down. Our party has decided the last session to head into the open seas, in a sense resetting the campaign, and semi-causing our DM to have to create a new one. Any advice would be appreciated. So we've really got a few questions in one here. I see this as kind of three questions. So first of all, as a player, what can you do if you feel that the DM is inexperienced or somehow doing a bad job of running the game? If you feel that the DM isn't doing their job well enough, what do you do? Secondly, there's a bit, I kind of don't want to go into it too much because it's not really a player thing, but there's a lot of sense here of this sandbox where there are some very powerful creatures that they are encountering. I'll touch on that briefly, but that's not really within the scope of what we're looking at today. And it's just, you can probably imagine what my answer is going to be for that, because it's something I've talked about a lot. And then, I mean, those are kind of the two things. So if you feel like the DM is struggling, whether it be through not prepping enough of the game or not keeping track of things, so like they're forgetting a rule and you remember the rule and they don't, you kind of got two ways to do it. The boring answer to all of these things, which kind of works, is to just talk to people, but who wants to do that? But yeah, having an adult conversation does cure a lot of problems, but I accept that we don't live in a perfect world and not everybody is capable of doing that. So if you are picking up some of the rules slack for the DM, as a player, my position would be like, if they are inexperienced, then you're helping them out. You're running a game, especially something like 5th edition that has loads of like mechanical bits going on. Running a game is tough, and if the players can help out, then if you're helping out by remembering things, I don't really agree with the idea that I don't think it should be my place. So if it's bugging you and you're having to you feel like you're not able to concentrate on what you're meant to be doing at the table because you're doing DM stuff instead, then I would kind of speak to the GM and say, look, if I'm taking more of a co-GM role, you could do that a bit more formally and kind of roll back your character so your character is a bit more of a supporting character. But if you want to just be the character and not have to worry about this, then I say let the GM fail, maybe. Because I put fail in inverted commas because I don't think it's going to make your game collapse necessarily. You either help them or you don't, and either way they're going to learn at a different rate perhaps. And then I'll briefly, and that is the thing to remember, it's an inexperienced DM, so you've got to give them a chance to learn. Like, not everyone's going to be able to do this perfectly straight away. There are those of us who've been doing it for a long time and still have a lot to learn. Absolutely. Yeah, there's people in the chat, Ordinal M, saying that they played in GURPS at the time and used to remind the GM about the rules. I think it's this thing where I'm trying to just think of the GM as another player. Like, I know there's a split role there, and it's a different type of role to just being a player. But you're there to help them, they're there to help you have a good time. And you know that I like delineation of like narrative authority and things like that. Like, I like a GM to be a GM and I like players to be players, but I think there is still room to cross over and help each other out. And very quickly about this whole sandbox thing, to me this all reads like they need to buy Electric Bastion and for a start and read the section entitled Information Choice Impact. They could just go to the blog and read it for free, but it's not quite as enjoyable an experience, I think. So it sounds like they're getting the impact because, you're encountering this undead wizard / lich that's much stronger than you, and then you're getting like pressed into their service, which is impact. You know, that's kind of in the right context, that would be a really interesting thing to happen. But it sounds like the players are. It sounds like they're just wandering into these encounters. Like they haven't chosen to go and face this wizard ahead of time. So they either haven't had enough information about where this wizard is and they've just stumbled onto them, or they have not had enough choice and they have just been. It sounds very passive here. They were introduced to the blue dragon. So yeah, if you're going to put these big creatures in there that they kind of don't stand a chance of taking head on, you need to give them a choice for how to deal with them. You need to give them information for how to for what to expect and what they're actually dealing with. So there you go, Zenimus. We have solved your problem. How to handle a knight's retainers, particularly that of the relationship between the squire and the knight, the groom and armourer, what they do in their downtime, reasonable wages, and how to prevent the said knight from developing MC syndrome, Master of Ceremonies syndrome, from having 2 to 3 people working under them. So I guess I've not heard of MC syndrome, but I guess MC syndrome is a great rap name, but it's also I'm assuming it means that they feel like they have to manage this entourage rather than concentrating on their own character. So from a player's point of view, what would I advise the player in this situation? Oh, yeah, Auden also just pointed out that MC is main character syndrome. I prefer Master of Ceremonies syndrome. It's MC syndrome is yeah. Anyway, so we can how would I handle this from a player's point of view? Because I have strong thoughts on like what the GM should be doing in this situation, and I think when you've got these kind of recurring NPCs that are tied to a character, I do like them to not be entirely under that player's control. I like them to have their own agenda and still be NPCs. So the player cannot just say, I mean, I can see the first response here in this thread is kind of related to what I'm saying, which is you can't just tell your squire to go and jump in front of this trap and set off this trap. They're not just a part of your equipment. They should have some kind of drive of their own if you want to make them interesting. I've seen the argument go the other way, where you literally treat them like equipment. And I think that can work as quite an elegant solution, but it sounds like here what they want is they want them to actually feel more like characters rather than tools. So here I think it's kind of basic stuff, but as a player, I would, when you're creating each of these extra characters, treat them like a mini character of their own and give them some kind of give them like a limitation and give them a desire. So something they want for themselves. So if you're doing the squire, a really obvious one could be that the squire one day wants to become a knight, and the limitation might be that they are they're terrified of horses, which would get in the way of being a knight. But having just those two things mean that they suddenly, you have to work around their personality to get them to do something. I guess it's like if you're like leading a team, you have to know like the limits and the desires of your team that you're leading, and lean into that. But I think when you're doing something like this, you really need to have that conversation at the start of the game with the GM and say, look, what are the rules about these NPCs? Are they all under my control? Do I just speak to them like an NPC and then you will tell me what they do? And as long as you're consistent, I think you can kind of have that work. Yeah, MC syndrome and DJ downtime. Right. We're smashing through these today, but we did have 12 to get through. But the people need answers. So Megamat215 asks, how do I tactfully tell someone that their new character is going to suck? I'm already not on your side. It's not a great first impression. I haven't read these ahead, by the way. I chose these based on the title and clicking in to see the length of the post, to see if it was a sensible length. just to get this out of the way, if the person this is finds this, you know who you are, and I'm sorry. Okay, it's not me, you're fine. In a campaign that I am in, there's one player who just retired his old PC and is making a new one. He really likes sorcerers. His old character was a sorcerer and his new character is going to be one. The only issue is that the party already has 2 wizards, and I really don't want us making this mistake again. He asked for a suggestion on what kind of character he should make, and I suggested someone with a lot of HP who could take hits, because our party is very squishy. He came up with a monstrosity using outdated Unearthed Arcana, new UA, house rules, feats, and a bunch of other stuff to make what can technically be called a tank. We're into like character build forums here, and I'm going to be out of my depth. I can warn you now. I'm getting flashbacks to 3rd edition. It's weird. I don't want to get into it, but it's weird. The main issue is that while he certainly will not die, not dying is basically all he can do, and we need more than just a tank. His character is very close flavour-wise to being a cleric, but I feel like he'd be offended if I asked if he could just play a cleric instead. At the same time, I also don't want to be constantly feeding his new character buffs just to make them relevant when I could be buffing the good characters instead. What should I do? Now, obviously, this is somebody who is playing a game that's a little bit different to how I personally would play the game, and I suspect a lot of people in the chat and that are watching would be playing their RPGs, but we've got to focus on what makes us the same rather than what makes us different. So I'm not going to be a total dick about it. Obviously, this is all very buildy, but I'm trying to think, like, is there a parallel here? And I think, yeah, sometimes you play in a game and forget all this stuff about tanks and HP and, you know, all this tactical combat stuff if that's not what your focus is, because it's not mine. Imagine more that, like, you've got someone who's created a character and it just doesn't feel like that character is going to be useful, because that's what it sounds like here. It sounds like this person is concerned that one character is going to just not be able to function in the game. They're going to be they're kind of meant to fit a role, but they're not able to do that role well. And I would say it sounds like if they've messed around with loads of different feats and stuff, and they've kind of bodged together this character, they're really trying. They've not just shown up and not made an effort. It sounds like they've made an effort to do the job that they were told they needed to do in the group. And I would rather have a player that really tries and really brings, you know, enthusiasm to the game, and then you end up, you know, the character dies, or you fail, or you stumble around a bit. I'd rather that than have everybody sort of show up with perfectly tuned characters and then they just smash through everything. So my player advice to this player is to remember that, yes, you are playing to win, but you're also playing to have a good time. I know that sounds like a really wishy-washy answer. But yeah, you try and sort of go into this with good faith that the other player is bringing their enthusiasm, and just because they've not built their character very well, try not to put pressure on them to, like, that they have to perform like it's a job. You know, they've worked hard on this character and they've shown up. So, you know, I would see how it goes. Yeah, it's hard to draw a parallel for, like, games like it's hard to draw a parallel between this and, like, the kind of games that I enjoy, because it's more of an issue when you've got characters that are too similar. Then you maybe come up with a problem if they're not interesting enough individually. Having characters that are just, yeah, it's not really something that comes up for me. Thank you for the kind words in the chat, Senoj. So, you can tell we're in the D&D forum with some of these topics. Consistently feeling irrelevant as a player in combat. Advice? Hello all. So for context, I've been playing 5th edition for around 4 years now. And while I know much about the rules, how the game functions, and how I know I enjoy the social pillar of the game extensively, I've realised that for the most part, I consistently tend to feel sad and downright irrelevant when it comes to combat encounters. In terms of classes, I have played all these different classes, and it feels like the two classes I've had the most fun with were the first two, the Commander and the Thief, but I'm not quite sure why. In most combat encounters, I often feel overshadowed by my party members because it feels like my character just uses the same action over and over, e.g. attack, Eldritch Blast, etc. While I know that this might imply I'd enjoy spellcasting classes like Wizard, I want to enjoy the classes I listed, but I just feel irrelevant. Any advice? And then there's a load of jargon about spell choices and so on down here. So, remember here we're still in player advice. I need to stop giving like GM advice. This is advice to the player. So if this player comes to me and they say they're not enjoying combat, they feel like they're not... Essentially, it sounds like that they feel like they're not making interesting choices in combat. Obviously, you know what I want to say. You can probably read my mind. I'm not always going to say play Electric Bastion Land or Into the Odd. But it sounds like the game that they're playing in, if it's anything like 5th edition games I've played, combat is long and it's not always massively dynamic. Sometimes it has that grind effect of like, we know that we've won, we just need to reduce these numbers down now. And a lot of that is on the GM. I know I said that I wasn't going to give GM advice, but I am going to give a little bit of GM advice. So a good combat encounter should be exciting, even if you are just literally using your sword to attack every turn, because there should be choices about who you're attacking. There should be environmental stuff going on. The decision to fight in itself should be an interesting decision. The decision to continue to fight should be an interesting decision. There should be stuff going on with the other characters. You know, you're working as a team. Who do you protect? How do you position yourselves? I feel like you can do this without needing to have like a load of weird buffs and debuffs and, you know, all that shit going on. So there's a lot of this that's on the GM. But if you are a player in this situation, it's hard to know what to recommend other than play a different game, because it feels like it's that 5th edition style of combat that's grinding this player down, I would say. I don't have enough 5th edition experience to recommend an actual class that they play. But yeah, I would try and like be creative in combat and see if the group respond to that. So if you do only have a sword and you don't have any special abilities on your character sheet, look to your environment and try to do something. If you do something cool with the environment or something cool like socially with one of the monsters in the encounter, maybe the players will respond well to it, and then that will become something that the GM encourages you to do again, and then before you know it, you've got interesting encounters. Maybe. Wishful thinking, I think. Here we go. How to be chaotic. So, I'm wanting to play a chaotic good Satyr Paladin with the Oath of the Ancients. They're going to be jovial, full of life, and chaotic. I'm very much a lawful person. Any pointers on how best to play it? Also, any existing fictional characters to draw inspiration from will be greatly appreciated. So, alignment. I'm not going to do the alignment rant because I think everybody has done their own version of it, but I like alignment in some ways. What I don't like is this mess of alignment where it means a million different things and it's never quite pinned down. And part of that's just because it's been around for so long and it means different things to different people. It's meant different things in different editions. So I quite like this sort of original definition of alignment, in that it was more like allegiance. So if you were lawful, you were like aligned, or whatever the past of allegiance is. You were like sworn to the forces of law, and like you were literally like serving the angels and stuff, and like dwarves and everything, and like cosmic law. And if you were chaotic, it was because you were like innately chaotic, and you were like sworn to like, you know, hell and stuff. Now it moved away from that pretty quick, and it came to be a bit more tied to like behavior as well as sort of cosmic alignment. And when you try and put both together, you get into some difficulties. And Planescape kind of managed it, but even then, it kind of it worked there because they kind of embraced that it was quite messy. But yeah, if you want to play a chaotic character, I think the classic way to not go is to just be random. And I know this is like the oldest advice in the book, but like the annoying chaotic character that's just random, they do things that make no sense because they say, oh, well, I'm chaotic, so I would do that. Instead, think about what it would mean to be actively chaotic and like deliberately chaotic. So you are, if law represents like civilization and order and the gods, to be chaotic is to kind of be against that. So pick something that you are against on the lawful side, or pick a chaotic element that you are particularly tied to. So I don't know how it works in 5th edition, but like there was for a while, like chaos was kind of linked to like the Feywild and kind of elves and wizards, and like there's been certain versions of the game where like magic, like arcane magic, is innately chaotic and divine magic is innately lawful. What I'm saying in short is pick something specific. Saying you're just chaotic is not enough. Pick something like, how are you chaotic, and what element of chaos are you tied to? And be focused in what do you actually want to change about the world to make it more aligned with chaos or less lawful. Oof, this is a long one. I'm definitely going to hydrate for this. I think I'm the only player who dislikes being railroaded in my campaign. Oh, have I got some railroad thoughts recently? To avoid hurting feelings in case anyone from my campaign, we don't care. So, current campaign. Me and my friends... let's start again. So, current campaign me and my friends are running is very, very railroaded by the DM. I don't personally mind a railroading every now and then, but this is more than just dropping obvious plot hooks and going from there. This is where we as players have no say in where we go next, whether we agree to take quests and who are friends or enemies. We are actually, as 4 players, only a small part of a larger team consisting of 4 plus 5 DMPCs who accompany us and lead the group to our destinations. Uh-oh. Alarm bells going off. To give a more specific example, recently we found a lost person who was badly injured when they were attacked by a creature in the forest. They were attacked while looking for a hidden treasure out there and demanded that we help them to find the treasure. I objected based on their injuries. The DM outright said they are obviously concussed, and I didn't want to put someone like that in further harm's way, nor to make our team's focus be distracted between our own survival and someone else who is basically unable to defend themselves. Everyone else in the party didn't mind them coming with us still, and I was fine with that. Being outvoted normally is totally cool, and the problem was when one said out of character, well, the DM probably wants us to keep them around, so might as well. And the other 2 players along them agreed that it seemed what was intended for the campaign. I hate telling people how you are supposed to play, but this wasn't a reason I liked. I don't want to leave because when we do get to do more open-ended RP or combat, it's super fun. It's a group of people I've known for over 5 years and I love all of them. But it seems just like I'm the odd man out at the party and I'm really struggling to what to do now. I'm glad everyone's having fun with the DM and that we're able to do something like this regularly, but having no control over what our party does is getting annoying. Okay, we get it. So, yeah, the DM is very railroady and the rest of the party is 100% fine with that. So railroading, again, we're going into player advice, but I'm going to give a very, very small snippet of like my thoughts on railroading. My hot take is that while I generally lean towards a more sandbox style of game, I can see the appeal of elements of railroading, and one that I've I can't remember where I read about this. It was on a blog. Rather than call it railroading, somebody suggested something like theme parking, was it? Or theme parking, as a sort of cross between railroading and sandboxing, where you have a sandbox. So if you imagine you're at a theme park, you have a sandbox, you can go anywhere, but then once you get on one of the rides, you're on a little bit of a railroad for a bit, and then you get off and you can go where you want. My point is, I can understand the desire to want to have that rigid structure. But I think where it's gone too far here is it sounds like there's just no choices. And it's tricky because the other players do seem to like what's going on. Like, they don't mind that they're going through it not having to make lots and lots of big decisions. Then they get to do a bit of role playing and then they move on. It's almost like, watching a TV series or something. So I can see it. Again, the issue here is just expectations. Like, the GM, it sounds like they're running a game that's working for most of their players. It's just not working for this one player. Sounds like super obvious advice, but here it sounds like everyone's cool, so they should just talk to the GM and say, I'm finding like I'd like a few more like big decision points where we can really take things off in a different direction. The DMPCs thing set off a red flag. But this used to be like this is just setting off alarm bells from like, it used to be like an absolute red flag, the idea of having a DMPC. But I do like occasionally there being like regular NPCs that kind of might come with you. And if they're handled well, it's not awful. The problem comes when they're like outshining the PCs and they're doing the PC's job for them. But it can work okay. So yeah, here it is just a really boring one. It's talk to the GM. Or I'd even be tempted to like say, let's try a one shot and I will run a one shot for you guys, and then run a one shot in a more sandboxy style and see what the group think of it, because the group might just not like it. Some people find it's too much choice. So yeah, it's a boring one. It's a conversation one, I'm afraid. I know, I don't like doing it either. So how do you carry momentum between sessions? To sum this up succinct... Oh, Jesus, you're going to make me say this. To sum this up succinctly, our last session had a 2-hour-long chase/combat scene that ended with us cornering a mini-boss in possession of a MacGuffin. Mini-boss, MacGuffin, come on. The DM ended the session there, as he was exhausted. This MacGuffin is very important to my PC, so I got very into the session and channeled it into a lot of emotional role-playing. But tomorrow we carry on the story, and as I think about it, I just cannot hit that same level of intensity or excitement. So I want to ask you all, when your DM ends on a cliffhanger or emotional high point, how do you get back into the mindset again to carry on the story? I'm sorry I can't read off the screen. I'm finding reading these threads really difficult. I think because they're typed kind of conversationally, it's easy enough to read it in your head, but to read it out loud is another game entirely. So from looking at the topic here, I was kind of hoping that it's kind of gone in a completely different direction to what I expected. I thought it was going to be more that the sessions were ending on a bit of a low, and then they were struggling to get excited about the next session, whereas here the GM's like ended on a cliffhanger, which you think would be a really good way to end your session, but for whatever reason it's just not working for this player. It's almost like they can't get back to that high point. And I guess the lesson from this is just that not everything's going to work for every player. Like, you might have a piece of advice that seems like, yeah, end on a cliffhanger makes perfect sense, and 3 of the players love it. But for another player, it's causing a problem. So communication, again, I'm sorry, it is the way. But in terms of like between sessions, I'm not a fan of cliffhangers. Not a fan, I don't mind them, but it's not what I would choose to do, I don't think. Because I feel like it's like finishing when you put down a novel that you're reading, like in the middle of a chapter, and I kind of come back into it. And you're straight back into the action. You think that would be good, but I actually find that kind of difficult. Like, I find it hard to hard to get back in. So what I actually like is, I like a session to end with like an ending, which I fail at all the time. I regularly plan to I regularly like mistime it so that we end with like a whimper and we don't get to any kind of climax. And it happens, but what I like to try and do is to end with something relatively impactful happens, and then we kind of leave the game there. And then, rather than do a cliffhanger, I would treat it more like, rather than a cliffhanger, I would treat it like between two seasons of a TV program. So when we come back to the game next week, I like there to have been some time in between, and I like something to have happened, something to have changed. And I know I've talked before about how I like foreground growth, and I don't like character growth that happens between sessions. But I'm not really talking about the characters as such. Like, maybe the character situations have changed, but I like it more if the situation has changed. So you come back and something is different, and it's almost like, it's that kind of picaresque thing where you're using the same characters, and they're in a different situation. Like, more like a series of short stories that are connected by a common thread rather than like one epic story. For me, that's what works, but it's going to depend on the player. And as we see here, not everything's going to work for every player. This one's already giving me issues. Can a group survive without a dedicated tank? In session 0 of an upcoming campaign, the group is so far 2 casters, a fighter, and me. I was planning on going with the Way of the Mercy Monk, but is this feasible without a barbarian? Are they necessary in every campaign? So they have a fighter, and they're saying, do we need a barbarian? So this is like a 5e thing. I'm not going to get into the 5e discussion, but credit, the top answer says you are playing D&D and not WoW. So I would always say make the character that you are enthusiastic about. If there is a gap in the group that feels like a niche that could be like, that's ripe for the taking, and you sort of take that niche and make an interesting character using that as inspiration, I think that's good. But I would never create a character. You don't want it to feel like work. You don't want to feel like, well, I've got to be the healer, so I'll make a healer character. I would always go with what makes you enthused. And again, GM advice, I'm sorry. A good GM should be able to make it work if you've got a group of 4 thieves. And I like the idea that I do like a focused group. I like a group of players, a group of characters that are tied together somehow. And having them all be the same class is something I've really wanted to try for a while. I still want them to have unique things, but it's like kind of what makes Blades in the Dark interesting. Like your characters in Blades in the Dark are all kind of thieves, or in Spire, which I know I mention on every stream. In Spire, like every character is a little bit of a wizard because they all have some kind of like magical, or kind of more like cleric-y kind of stuff going on. And in a straightforward D&D game, I feel like you should be able to make a game interesting with 4 fighters, or 4 barbarians, or 4 monks. And it makes it feel more like your group has a bit of identity then. So I would say, yes, you can survive without a dedicated tank. You just might have to get good in combat, and at not just having stand-up fights with the enemies. Oh. See, I opened this one up earlier and the post has been removed. Magic jar alignment change. So I did glance at this, and it was something to do with like the spell magic jar, which is you put your soul into something. So let's say a literal jar for the sake of it. You put your soul into the jar, and then you can use your soul. Your body just goes limp, and then your soul in this jar can like leap out and possess somebody else, steal their body, and like inject their soul out into the jar. So you can kind of essentially you can possess somebody. And the GM presumably is saying, well, if you do that, that's an evil act, so your alignment is going to change to evil. Again, we're back onto the alignment thing, and having alignment as like the judge of behavior. And I never really liked. In fact, I'm going to come out and I'll drop the full hot take. Okay, settle in. Notice that when I was talking about alignment before and the bits that I liked, I only really talked about chaos and law. I didn't talk about good and evil, because the idea of like universal cosmic good and evil is kind of bullshit, and like it's just so rife with like issues, and it's just not interesting to me in the same way that law versus chaos is. Like, you can see why someone would be swayed over to law versus chaos, but like good versus evil is just a less interesting, and it's just a less clear dichotomy to me. So I don't like good and evil as alignments. I would like to change them to something else. If you want to maintain that grid, I'll do this on the blog. That's my challenge to myself. I'll think of something else to go on good and evil. I'm sure I've done this before, but I don't like the good and evil thing on there, because I don't like the idea that certain acts will just mark you as evil and certain ones will mark you as good, especially when you are playing something like D&D, which presumably involves a lot of murdering people, and the idea that like possessing somebody would tip you over the edge to being evil. But like, where do you draw the line? And it's not what I want in my Dungeons and Dragons game, frankly. I'm down with devils and angels, but I'd rather they be part of law and, you know, serving their respective masters, rather than innately purity and like evil. Anyway, that's my hot take. That's all I have for that. How common is it to make a big mistake? Hi, so I'm really new to playing D&D, but I'm trying to learn and be a good player. I've been taking notes and paying attention during sessions. We're playing on Roll20. Most of the time, we end up playing every other week, and at least from what I can tell, I appear to take the most thorough notes, which plays into my error here. I thought the party had a potion we didn't actually have. Was confident enough during our last session not to actually go flip through the page to double check, and nobody else had this information written down anywhere, or if they did, it wasn't checked during the session. It was only after I went to sleep and woke up the next day that it occurred to me that I might have misremembered this item we acquired from a session we had over a month ago. I've already thought over how best to fix the error without changing much of the last session, and send a message out to fellow players to see if they'd like the small tweaks that should enable the same result without needing a potion we didn't actually have. I've also made a more public item list for these miscellaneous items that nobody has officially claimed and put on a character sheet, so this shouldn't happen again. Does this kind of thing happen a lot when learning D&D? I'm just feeling incredibly guilty right now, and just hope the group won't get upset, because it's been a lot of fun playing with them. None of them have been online yet, so I'm stressing out a bit waiting. I feel awful for this person. My heart breaks for them, because they're agonizing over this thing, and I just want to tell them, like, it doesn't matter. Like, if you used a potion that you didn't actually have and nobody called you out on it at the time, once you get to the point where the GM has said, okay, you've drunk the potion, and let's say that it restored some HP or it made you invisible, when you've done that and you've described it, then it happened. I would argue the fiction that you're describing at the table between you trumps your notes for the most part. Again, my heart breaks for this person waking up the next day like, no, and like they realize that they feel like they've cheated at the game. So yeah, that it sounds like they're taking it super seriously, which is good. But I feel bad. I don't want them to be agonizing over these things and feeling guilty, because the whole game relies on this weird shared fiction existing in the conversation. You can't note down everything. you get those weird questions where you ask the GM like, oh well, do my shoes have laces because I want to use them to do something? And you can look at your sheet and it's not going to tell you if your shoes have laces, because you have to work off these assumptions now and then, and sometimes you just have to decide as a group, does it make sense that we have this thing? And here you described having a potion. It made sense at the time. Nobody said, actually, you weren't trying to do it deliberately to cheat. In that moment, you all believed that this thing existed, so it existed, as far as I'm concerned. And that is, to me, it's better to just say like, yeah, well, you did have it, so you must have had it all along, rather than go back and sort of retcon it and say, oh, well, actually, we didn't do that. I used this ability instead, so that would have had the same effect. Yeah, just embrace the fact that reality is fuzzy when you're sharing it between a table full of people. I cannot help but see in the chat that Isopsophant says that alignment is usurped once again by the Magic the Gathering colour wheel. I've already done too much Magic the Gathering content in the last few weeks. I don't think people are digging it. If I do one talking about how the colour pie is better than alignment, I think I'll lose the last few readers I have. But you're right. The colours in Magic the Gathering are much more interesting than alignments, and they still manage to maintain elements of good and evil and law and chaos. But the white slice of the pie in Magic is not innately good, and the black slice of the pie is not necessarily bad. They just represent different things. And that is much more interesting. So yeah, going back to that alignment question, just pick a colour or a combination of colours from Magic instead. But yeah, how common is it to make a big mistake? It's incredibly common. But it's not a mistake unless it causes problems. It happened. How to be more useful in combat as a spellcaster who doesn't cast spells. The title says it all. For a bit more context, in the current campaign I'm playing in, it is very dangerous to cast spells. Basically, to make a long story... Listen, don't say the title says it all, and then say, basically, to make a long story short, this is what I do when I'm talking. I fight really hard to not use these kind of phrases when I'm writing, but I'm like agonizing to talk to. Someone I used to work with would always call me out whenever I said, to cut a long story short, and then talked for 10 minutes. So, yeah, to cut a long story short, every monster has an extremely powerful magic detection. The more powerful monster, the more powerful the magic detection. So in most places outside towns and cities, it's very risky to cast magic. Slight problem, I'm an undead warlock. I didn't know about the magic detection stuff before the campaign, which I don't really have a problem with. So in combat, I've had very limited things to do. Currently, I've mainly been throwing ball bearings, caltrops, hunting traps, and then doing objective stuff like grabbing plot items. But I want to do more. I have pretty low strength and dex, so I was hoping some people could help me come up with some more ideas. Our party consists of a monk, alchemist, artificer, blah blah blah. This is like, I'm getting real hot and cold vibes from this problem. I applaud that they are taking this in such good humour, because they've got nothing to do in combat, they say, because they can't use the spells, which are like their main thing. So they've been doing other stuff. They've been getting creative, doing objective stuff like grabbing plot items. Like, this is what you want in combat encounter. You want them to have to actually do other things rather than just fight to the death. But then they've been absolutely thrown under the bus because they've created an undead warlock and they didn't know there was going to be this magic detection thing. And yeah, I don't normally read the comments, but I'm just going to see if they do clarify. They do not seem to reply. Yeah, so presumably when they use magic, it attracts more monsters, so they can't do it. I don't know. Your GM has put you in a really bad place, because I like that kind of restriction for a short while, and it sounds like this player has kind of embraced this limitation and they've got really creative with it. So like, even like a dungeon where you can't use magic could be fun if it's something they've chosen to enter. So again, information, choice, impact, right? Information. this dungeon, you can't use magic in it. Choice, this isn't the only dungeon, so you can go somewhere else if you want, but this dungeon does have a lot of treasure in it. Impact, if you go ahead and go into that dungeon, you will have to be creative because you can't use your magic at all. That would be a fun outcome. But being randomly thrown into a world where the main thing on your character sheet can't really be used kind of indefinitely is a bit too far. Yeah, so I can see in the chat like a side quest to get an item that goes under the magic detection. I would hope that the GM was like setting up to something where there's a big moment when like magic becomes available again. Because as it stands, this is like, it's not an interesting limitation because it's taking away too much and not giving enough back in return. So my advice, yeah, I know that I'm giving GM advice. So as a player, my advice to the player would be speak to the GM, I'm sorry, and just say like, look, what can we do to get around this? There must be a way. Because if a player comes to you with a question like that and you say, and you don't give them a good hook, then that is an absolute failure as a GM. Like, when the players ask you questions, give them good answers. Last one. Am I weird for sort of wanting my PC to die? Pretty much just... Is it the same person? No. Pretty much just the title. I keep half joking about wanting my current PC to die, and everyone else at my table finds it really odd. It isn't that I'm not attached, I adore my character, and I'm not actively seeking out purposefully bad scenarios which will get me killed. I just think it might be sort of fun to roleplay dying, and to see how others RP their reaction to it. Like I said, I'm not sabotaging anything to cause it, so do I just have a really weird mindset? I think it's the same. I mean, it's like an outdated reference now, but it's that Game of Thrones effect where when you know that main characters can die, at least in the early days, even if you're not happy that character dies, there's a kind of like, there's a thrill to it because it's a big impactful moment. So again, my apparently this whole stream has just been me talking about this information choice impact idea. If you go to bastionan.com and search for information choice impact, you will find the post. And no, you won't. You will search for ICI doctrine is the name of the post. ICI being information choice impact. I think here the player is like craving more impact, because there's not much more impactful than having your character die, and it's something that can't happen in like a video game. So if you're playing through, I don't know, The Witcher, your character will die, but then you'll just like reload the save and you're back. And even things like Dark Souls, where it's based around your character dying, they don't really die. They keep coming back. Permanent death is like a very punishing mechanic, but there is a thrill to it, and some people kind of just want to experience it, because it feels like it's one of the key features of like this kind of game, that this kind of big impactful story thing can happen to your character, even as big as them being removed from the story and like a new character comes in. So I don't think it's weird at all. No, I think I can see the appeal of it, especially if you've not experienced it before. Yeah, it's kind of like the same way that like when you're watching a film and you're like, oh, wouldn't it be good if that character died? And then when you see them kind of scrape their way through and they get out, it's like, oh, something's lost because like they've got through with their plot armor. So that is, we've smashed through that in like 50 minutes, 12 problems solved, and we've kind of solved. We don't want that. We've solved everything in the world that a player could possibly be having trouble with. So so that gives me time to do my regular thing, which is to say that if you have enjoyed this stream, you can go to bastionan.com to find out more. If you want to vote on what next week's stream is going to be about, there is currently a vote going on my Patreon, which you can sign up to. Patreon.com/Bastionland. Also, this last week I released the Bastionland backstage video, which had some sweet gossip about 2 upcoming things, which I can't say anything more about, but things that will be getting announced in the next few periods of time. And yeah, if you have enjoyed them, I appreciate everyone's support. We've had a few new Patreon members this month, so I want to say a special thank you to them for signing up and making all this possible. So next week, I will be doing my normal stream on the Tuesday night. The following week, I am not here, so there will be no stream, unfortunately. But then when I come back, or maybe the week before, I will try and do like a 2-stream week, where we do the normal stream and then we do an extra one to make up for lost time. Until then, I hope you've all enjoyed the stream. Thank you for getting involved in the chat, and it's goodbye for now.